During a 1911 archive dig, engineers logged something that didn't fit the legend. In a few key areas of Titanic, iron rivets were used instead of steel. The reason was simple: schedule and supply. Today, we go back to the shipyard to see how those choices were born and what they meant for mankind's destiny at sea. Before we roll forward, like this video, subscribe to the channel and come with me inside the build. White Star answered Cunard with a different bet: not to run faster, but to grow bigger. In 1907, Ismay and Lord Peary sign off on the Olympic-class liners. Thomas Andrews turns commercial demands into compartments, horsepower, and passenger flows on board. Belfast expands the slips and raises the aero gantry to cradle the giant hull. Materials, crews, and sequences are mapped out week by week. With the line set, the yard gets ready for the keel to touch the blocks. It all begins with the hull lines, a fine entry, broad beam, and displacement tuned for stability and comfort. In the drawing office, they lay out lines plans, general arrangements, and scantlings for every structural member. On the lofting floor, those curves are blown up full scale and corrected with flexible battens. Tank tests guide resistance and propeller choices. Watertight subdivision is refined in decks and bulkheads. Once the math is locked in, templates and cutting lists are born. To receive Titanic's hull, Belfast strengthens slips 2 and 3, sets hardwood keel blocks, and checks plumb lines to the millimeter. The aero gantry is finished with steam winches and rails for chain hoists. Yard railways feed plates, sections, and rivets into numbered stores. Rigging crews run cables, test sheaves, and mark safe routes overhead. Everything follows a strict sequence: position, align, and lockdown before the first plate ever kisses the keel. On March 31st, 1909, Titanic begins its physical life. Under the aero gantry, the first section of keel is lowered onto the blocks by steam crane, every inch checked with plumb bobs and gauges. Surveyors, carpenters, and riveters work in a tight chain: set, verify, secure. Thomas Andrews watches tolerances and clearances up close. When that first rivet closes on the keel plate, the schedule leaves the blueprint, and the hull starts rising from the ground. Frames climb off the keel like ribs off a spine. Lofting templates set the curve and spacing of every frame. Longitudinals and deck beams tie the skeleton together, while temporary shores hold alignment. Fitters check plumb, square, and gaps to be ready for plating. Temporary rivets lock key points. The permanent rows will follow in order. This is when the hull gains real volume, and its geometry finally shows itself on the slipway. gates arrive numbered by strake and are eased into place over the frames. Overlapped seams take rows of red-hot rivets. Crews of 4 or 5 move in rhythm: the heater, the passer, the holder-on, and the riveters with their hammers. Jigs keep pitch and alignment. Wedges preserve the curve. Once locked, the crew caulks the seams with hammer and chisel to keep the ocean out. Each finished strake lets them move on, tying the hull from bow to stern. Transverse bulkheads rise from the double bottom to the E-deck, splitting the hull into 16 watertight compartments. Rails guide sliding doors that can drop by gravity or hydraulic power in seconds. Fitters check clearances, guides, and locking faces. Pumps and valves are zoned with built-in redundancy. Mechanical indicators show each door open or shut. Every test cuts down uncertainty and shows how this subdivision is meant to save buoyancy when the worst happens. Up front, the forged stem is fitted to the first runs of plating, fixing the sharp line of the bow. Aft, the massive stern frame goes in, carrying the rudder and wrapping the outboard shafts. Precision machining lines up bearings, bushings, and the stern tube. The rudder itself will be hung later, once the hull is stiff enough. Every alignment here will shape vibration, handling, and the overall efficiency of the 3-screw drive. Titanic's shell blends steel plates with both steel and iron rivets, placed according to the loads they must carry. High-stress areas get steel, secondary zones take wrought iron. Tests check toughness and how each rivet head forms under the gun. Inclusions and poor forging silently cut safety margins in intense cold, a weakness we understand better today. The goal back then is balance, availability, cost, and safety, all within the standards of the age. On the boat deck, Wayland davits are fitted, able to serve more than one lifeboat per station. White Star chooses 20 boats, in line with Board of Trade rules that still tie capacity to tonnage, not headcount. The layout favors open walkways and a clean profile. Even over extra boats, some designers propose. Load and swing tests prove the davits under strain. If this level of detail speaks to you, stay with us for the next chapters. Hit like, subscribe, and help keep this deep dive series alive. "29 Scotch boilers enter through huge deck openings before the upper decks are closed. 24 double-ended units with 6 furnaces each, and 5 single-ended with 3. They're set on pedestals and lined up with air intakes and the exhaust uptakes that will feed the future funnels. Stoke holds get coal bunkers and passages for trimmers. Grate bars, furnace doors, and ash pans are fitted. Pressure, feed, and draft tests check the lungs that will drive the engines to life. Titanic pairs two triple expansion reciprocating engines on the wing shafts with a low-pressure Parsons turbine on the center shaft. Bed plates are bolted to the frames, crankshafts and bearings are lined up with piano wire and precision straight edges. Pistons, rods, and valve gear get their fine adjustments. Exhaust steam from the wing engines will feed the central turbine, squeezing extra power from every pound of coal. Condensers, pumps, and the thrust block complete the heart of the ship. Dedicated generators power the lights, winches, pumps, and wireless room. Cables run through trays and technical passages on ceramic insulators. Centrifugal and plunger pumps handle fresh water, sewage, and fire main with valves grouped by zone. Switchboards carry breakers and fuses for each section of the ship. Gauges, sight glasses, and valve wheels allow crews to isolate failures and keep services running. Redundancy follows the same logic as the hull's subdivision. With the hull well advanced, the superstructure grows over decks A, B, and C. Lighter plating forms deck houses, corridors, and shelters. Openings are left for windows, skylights, and the great first-class staircase. Deck beams and pillars fix the internal heights. With each new level, the ship moves closer to its final silhouette, while the builders fight to keep everything aligned under the growing weight of the future interiors. On the upper decks, joiners turn bare steel into first-class luxury. Oak paneling, decorative columns, and plaster moldings cover the ship's metal bones. In the staircase atrium, the outlines of railings and landings take shape. In the grand dining saloon, clad pillars and coffered ceilings organize the space. Catalog designs from the company meet hand-built adjustments, one piece at a time, until the liner looks more like a floating hotel than a machine. On the middle decks, function takes the lead. In second class, compact cabins get plain paneling, washstands, and practical furnishings. In third class, metal bunks, shared tables, and direct routes to open decks define the space. Extra ducts and cowl ventilators push fresh air deeper down. Narrow corridors, numbered doors, and clear signage help people find their way. It's the same hull, but very different promises of travel on each level. Cowl ventilators and ductwork push fresh air into cabins, lounges, and holds. Mechanical fans boost circulation in the deepest spaces. Heating runs on hot water in coils tucked behind paneling, fed by auxiliary boilers. In the mailrooms, dedicated compartments hold racks, bags, and routes leading up to the decks. As an RMS liner, Titanic is built to move letters and parcels as relentlessly as it moves people. With the bulkheads in place, the yard tests watertight integrity by zones. Doors are closed from the bridge and locally, timing each operation and checking the locks. Pumps empty partially flooded compartments while crews measure flow and pressure. Valves allow sections of fresh water, fire main, and sewage to be isolated. We now know these trials were based on limited damage scenarios, in line with calculations for up to 4 flooded compartments, not more. Once the hull is fully plated, paint goes on in layers, anti-corrosive primer, dark topsides, and a red oxide bottom. Draft marks are transferred from the drawings to the hull, alongside the plimsoll load line. Aft, shafts get their bearings and propellers, 2 4-bladed on the wings and 1 3-bladed in the center. Each step tweaks weight, balance, and how much metal the sea will see, getting the hull ready for its big slide into the water. On May 31, 1911, Titanic's hull leaves the slip for the first time. In the days before, the yard sets the launching ways and coats the rails with tallow and grease to cut friction. Drag chains and cables are rigged to break the run into the River Lagan. Officials, workers, and onlookers pack stands and walls. The hull hits the water with no running engines, no live boilers, and unfinished interiors. The building phase on the blocks ends, and the long fitting out at the quay begins. Alongside the pier, the launched hull takes on masts, rigging, and deck gear. The Marconi wireless system is installed, with antennas strung between masts and its own operating room. Furniture, carpets, and linens come aboard by crane and hatch, sorted by class and deck. Shore cranes feed a non-stop stream of crates and boxes. This is the moment when a bare ship becomes a lived-in world, blending hard engineering with comfort and style. The crew begins to come aboard for internal trials. Officers walk the corridors, posting notice boards and checking work routes. Stewards get briefed on cabin service, cleaning routines, and how to move between classes without being seen. Seamen test boats, lines, and winches. Every group learns its space and role before sea trials. Daily life is rehearsed so the ship can run with precision from day one. At least, that's the plan. Tied up at the quay, the engines are run at controlled speeds. Boilers warm up slowly, feeding the reciprocating engines and the turbine, still short of full load. Engineers track vibration, bearing temperatures, and oil flow. At the helm, rudder angles and response times are measured in degrees and seconds. Each reading feeds fine-tuning before the ship dares to prove itself in open water. In April 1912, Titanic leaves Belfast for her sea trials. Fresh paint on the hull, machinery still settling in, she is pushed through speed runs, turns, and crash stop tests. The crew checks rudder bite, shaft response, and how the hull rides at different power settings. Instruments record turning circles, stopping distances, and fuel use. The numbers confirm performance right where designers expected for a liner of the Olympic class. On paper, everything is within limits. After trials, Titanic is formally handed over to the White Star Line and heads for Southampton. The hull still looks fresh from the yard, with interiors barely touched. In the offices, brochures boast about comfort, size, and watertight subdivision. The phrase, practically unsinkable, starts appearing in marketing and conversation, backed by compartment diagrams and Olympic-class experience. Technical data feeds a quiet confidence, one that rarely questions edge cases or worst-case scenarios. Titanic is full of signs of newness: flawless paint, polished metal, interiors with that just-finished feel. Passengers come aboard by lists, schedules, and strict protocols. For many, the safety claims and Olympic-class reputation turn the ship into a symbol of rock-solid stability. Officers and crew trust in the math of compartments, rivets, and tests. The idea of structural failure exists in reports and calculations, but almost never in the small talk on the dock.